Welcome to the Hangers Eat podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicast. In this two-part series, Jack Schonely and I sit down with Kris Stone, the owner and handler of Canine Torque, and the Huey Vets crew. In this conversation, the EMU Crew discusses their work with Canine Torque, a detection dog trained to find electronic storage devices. Torque specializes in finding flash drives and SD cards to help investigators gather evidence against child sexual predators and traffickers. Torque is also a therapy dog providing comfort and support to veterans and children in hospitals and schools. The EMU Crew also shares their work with Huey Vets, an organization that uses helicopters to raise awareness about the forgotten heroes of the Vietnam War. We discuss the challenges and maintenance considerations of operating and restoring the Huey helicopter. EMU 309's Geoff Carr, a Vietnam vet, and his team discuss the battle damage and life expectancy of the aircraft during the Vietnam War. They also discuss the nonprofit nature of their organization and their mission to support veterans and raise awareness about PTSD. Thank you to our sponsors Bell, Precision Aviation Group, and CNC Technologies. Cheers.
Welcome to the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts. The Hangar Z podcast is the first and only podcast dedicated to promoting and exploring the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation. Join your host, John Gray, Jeff Ratkovich, and Jack Schonely.
Still southbound, skidding to a stop. Stand by here. Looks like you're getting ready to bail. Heads up, guys, bailing. Okay, the guy, he's running through the house, jumping the fence, through the shotgun, through something out. Grabbing the shotgun. Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again. He is armed. Stay there. Hold your position.
4 on the stop. You're in custody.
Good advising code 4 on the stop.
Hey, welcome to the Hangers Eat podcast. I'm your host, John Gray. Have a super unique and very special conversation lined up for today. First time I think we've had a canine as part of our conversation. Back in Echo in Austin, Texas, SR3 set us up. Jeff and I had walked away from our podcasting booth and we walked back and SR3 had taken our seats along with one of the rescue canines, and they actually had a headset on the canine that was in frame for that. They didn't actually record. So this is the Hangar Z's first live recording with a canine. I would like to say that we're covering Vertical MRO's podcast on this as well. So I'll do my best impersonation of Val, MedVet, as we go through this. And looking forward to this conversation. Had the opportunity to meet the Canine Torque at HAI this year, or VAI now, and fell in love with Torque, as I think everybody probably does. Jack, you were there as well, and you got to meet Canine Torque. What was your experience like?
It was great. Dogs and helicopters, winning. I mean, I had two very high priorities in my career, in my life, so it was great. Meeting Torque and Kris and enjoying that time we had together at HAI, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation, both about Torque and about Huey's. So this will be great. Yeah,
at HAI, we were at the Vertical booth, and we had set up a beer party, a meet and greet for all the different hosts that are a part of the Vertical Helicast platform. So you have the Helicopter podcast, you have the Real Rescue podcast, Vertical MRO, Val was there, and the Hangar Z. So I think, the thought was a lot of people would show up to see the podcast folks and get some beers. But I think to be realistic, most people were there to see Torque. There was a huge line
absolutely
to see Torque, and that was really cool. So through that, I got to meet Kris and got introduced to the really awesome work that she's doing, and also the really cool work that's being done through Huey Vets. I'll go ahead and just say thank you guys for joining us. Thank you, Kris, for all the efforts that you've put into the industry with Canine Torque and the good work you're doing there. So I'd like to, at this point, just kind of hand it over to you, Kris, and start some introductions. If you could just introduce yourself and tell us what your role is, what the good work you're doing with Torque, and then we'll pass down the line and talk about Huey Vets and what you guys are doing there as well.
I'm Kris. I'm a canine handler. I've been a detection canine handler for 30 years. Yes, I'm that old. And we have Torque. No, here she is.
Bring you the
Torque
Frisbee.
Is a 10-year-old, delightful 10-year-old Belgian Malinois. You guys are both in law enforcement, so delightful and Malinois usually aren't used in the same sentence, but she's an exception to the rule.
She is.
Torque is also, she's an electronic storage device detection dog. She specializes in finding flash drives, SD cards. The application we use that for is to help investigators find evidence to put child sexual predators and traffickers away. She's one of probably about 15 dogs in the country that do that. And then she also is a crew member for EMU Inc., also known as Huey Vets. She goes on a lot of the flights with us. Torque, stop it. Sit. She goes on a lot of the flights with us. She also, Maria Gudovich, who wrote the New York Times bestselling book, Soldier Dog, she came on a flight with us, and we were giving like an exposure therapy flight to a veteran, and he started to panic as soon as the rotors started. And Torque noticed that and went over, put her head in his lap, and he was able to make it through the entire flight. So she helps with therapy flights for veterans.
Yeah. I think dogs have to be the most therapeutic breed of animal that ever existed. I think you look at a lot of successful therapy programs, and a lot of them have that element of therapy involved. What kind of therapy is Torque involved in outside of what you kind of just described?
Torque also does a lot of work at Children's Hospital. She also has a book. We do a lot of work at the Boys and Girls Club. I run the Play Like a Girl program. And Torque is actually, through her book and coming to the Boys and Girls Club with me, she's gotten a lot of little girls interested in aviation, because a lot of them, they don't even want to come to the program, but you bring a dog and they want to come, and then they start getting interested in the program. We talk about, the things that Elon Head does, Lee Coates, Samantha Poyer. You guys did a really great podcast with her last year. And so Torque has actually inspired a lot of little girls to get into aviation.
That's really cool. She is so multifaceted, and she's got a great demeanor. I just really, really enjoyed meeting Torque.
The other cool thing is because of all the work that she's done, a world-renowned sculptor sculpted a life-size sculpture of Torque. And he always does something unique about each one of his sculptures. And so I asked him, I was like, hey, since she's the famous Huey helicopter dog, and oh, by the way, she has the world record for the dog with the most flights in a Huey helicopter. But so I asked him if he could incorporate the Huey helicopter into his sculpture. And I asked if he could make the body of the sculpture the body of the Huey. And he said no. But I'm very persistent. So after about a month of persuasion, he did it. And it turned out amazing. It's currently in transition to its next location, and I'll let you guys know where it can be viewed.
Yeah, it was a super unique sculpture. I've never seen something like that. I believe if you go to your website, if you go to Canine Torque, the website there's some images there, and you can see what the sculpture looks like. But going back to your career, you talked about being a canine handler for 30 years. How did you get involved in the canine world?
I started out as a dog trainer, and then I wanted to do a little bit more with my life and decided, well, let's see if we can figure out something to do with the dogs. So I was in search and rescue for many years. I was on a FEMA team. Then we started doing disease detection. She does I've had dogs that do bomb detection. And then when I got Torque, I wanted to do something different and heard about electronic storage device detection. So I started doing that. And what the dogs detect when you do that, they're detecting the fire retardant that's on everything that has a memory chip. And it's a parts per billion. So it's amazing that the dogs can detect it. But that's what the dogs are looking for when they're looking for the electronic storage devices.
Wow. That's really interesting, and something that I don't think I realized that was taking place. Jack, did you have any experience with that, or was your agency involved with that at all?
No, I had never even heard of that, John, until talking to Kris. I didn't even know that existed. And it's amazing now that I've learned more. It's such an important tool for that mission, because the criminal element has figured out how to avoid certain things when it comes to police coming in and searching. And so one of the things that they did was change their style. They just don't leave their stuff on their hard drives. They put it on these chips. And it's incredible that Kris and Torque and only 15 dogs in the country are doing that. People ask all the time, well, how do these dogs find people and how do they find bombs? And I've said for years, the line I use is you can teach a dog to find a Snickers bar. I mean, it doesn't matter what you're teaching them to find. You just have to take what's already in these dogs, the drive, the incredible nose, and you just train them through techniques that Kris is well aware of and has done for her 30 years. And you have techniques where you focus it on a certain scent, and next thing you know, they're finding whatever you want. And in this case, with Torque, these chips, it's amazing. It's amazing, and I'm really impressed with it and thankful that there's dogs that are out there doing it to put some of these bad guys away, where you wouldn't find some of these things without the dog. We say that all the time for people. Now imagine a tiny little chip, our memory storage device. It's incredible.
Yeah, when you think of how that technology has changed and miniaturized, essentially now you're looking for something the size of a fingernail, and she's able to do that. Can you talk about what that process looks like for you and Torque as far as how you get called out and the types of cases you guys have worked? And maybe even if you could kind of highlight a case that you were a part of that was interesting.
Bell is proud to sponsor Vertical Helicasts and their vision to hold meaningful mission, safety, and best practice conversations in the helicopter industry. The lessons learned from these conversations will undoubtedly shape the future of both new and veteran helicopter operators.
Torque and I, we contract, as Jack probably knows. It's more cost efficient. It's kind of like search and rescue, where somebody else owns the dog. They feed the dog, they handle the medical care. So we contract with law enforcement. And so when they're executing a search warrant and they're trying to look for evidence of a child sexual predator or trafficker, we will get called in. I usually wait till the end, because by that point, all the rugs are pulled up, the couch covers are up. Torque has found mini SD card in the rubber bottom of a stapler. She has found a flash drive in an outlet. And then flash drives, they can make them look like toys. She found a little flash drive that looked like a frog thrown in a toy box. So she's done pretty well.
Fantastic.
And you train them that, like Jack said, you train for that the same way as you do any other, bombs, drugs. You train them the exact same way. It's just a different scent that you're imprinting them on. And she's very helpful when I can't find my phone at home.
That's great.
That's
what
actually
a bonus that is.
I've got a little Boston Terrier. Maybe I can train her to find my phone when I lose it.
That's great.
Oh, so not only does she do that, not only is she a therapy dog, but she flies, like you had mentioned. I read online that she's got the most flight hours of any dog that's at least recorded. Can you talk about your experience getting her comfortable flying and what that looks like in her flying experience?
Well, when I first started bringing Torque out, she was only 6 months old. And as Jack probably knows, you got to get them acclimated to it. So what I started doing is I would put her in the Huey and let her hang out in the Huey without, doing a cold load without anything on. And I did that for a couple of weeks, got her used to the Huey, with nothing happening. Then you start the blades up. The one thing that I always do is I make sure they have impeccable obedience, and the bond that you have with your dog. She knows I will never ask her to do anything that's going to hurt her. So that comes into play when she has to walk through the rotor wash for the first time. So she'll be right next to me. I tell her to walk with me. And once she did that the first time, she realized she wasn't going to get hurt. So it took a couple of months to train her. And then every time we fly, Torque flies with us. How I started with these guys, Randy Parent, who you and Geoff were talking about earlier, I used to fly with him with East Bay Regional Park Police. And then we noticed that a lot of search and rescue people and law enforcement officers, their dogs weren't properly trained to fly in helicopters. So we started a training program for search and rescue and law enforcement, people who needed to fly their dogs in the helicopter. how to properly go about doing that, the equipment that they use, like Torque when we fly with her. She has goggles to protect her eyes because she likes to stick her head out the door because it's like a giant car window for her. We have 2 tethers that are on her. I have 2, in case one fails, I have another one. She also has ear protections, and I tried all the dog ear protection. There's the mutt muffs that look like real ear muffs. Then there's the Ear Pro that just squeezes their ears. And I have found that the foam earplugs that I use work perfectly for her. And I use the ones with the cord so I can wrap it around her neck. And that way, when we get someplace, I can just pop them out of her ear, put them in my pocket. So you also have to acclimate them to all of the equipment also. So, and there's a lot of training that goes into it because this is a large helicopter. It's noisy. It vibrates. It flies with the doors open. So there's a lot of training that goes into making sure that she's comfortable in the aircraft.
That's a topic of conversation that Jack and I have had at length. And in fact, that's one of our hopes is to have an episode here in the future on canine air support operations. Because I think a lot of operators think, I can just throw a canine in here and we could transport them from A to B without considering all the things that you had just talked about.
A lot of agencies, they just do, they throw the dog in there and they get them to where they're going. But then the dog is all stressed out by the time they get there. So that's why I like to take the time to train the dog, how to be comfortable in the aircraft.
Very important. It's so important. And John, you're right. Most agencies they get the call and say, hey, can you guys transport this dog from point A to point B? And they just think, oh yeah, that's just like picking up the chief or something. No, it isn't. It's nothing like picking up the chief. It's a canine. It has to have been trained, exposed to these things that Kris is talking about. The rotor wash. I love that Kris brought that up because I've seen this so many times when we trained with our dogs and air support. The brand new dogs that had never been around the helicopter walking up and hitting that rotor wash and watching how they change until they see, oh, well, my handler here is continuing to walk. It seems okay, but they react to that rotor wash immediately the first time. And then 99% of them, the next time, don't react at all. Well, that's a clue. It's exposure. It's exactly what Kris was talking about. And it's so important. We will be talking about that at length in a future episode with some canine folks because it's just part of the deal that if you're in aviation and law enforcement, you're going to get called at some point to transport a dog. And you can't just say, oh, well, that's an easy mission. That's a simple mission. No, it's a little bit more complicated. You better be aware of some things. In many cases, you're transporting a dog that's trained to bite, and you better have some precautions. So Kris was talking about all the harnesses and the ear protection, the eye protection. It's all important. So I love that Kris just brought that up. That's important.
In my career, at least twice, I've actually had people come and train their dogs over time. So they would be there every time I landed. They told me that it was a part of the testing criteria that they had to be able to load the dog in the helicopter.
Rescue, it is.
Yeah,
it is, and that includes military stuff. When in LA, we had a certain person that was an ex-LAPD guy. There was a dog trainer with SEAL Team 6. And every time they came to California to pick up new dogs, the first thing they did was call me and say, hey, can we come up to air support? And they just bring the dogs up and walk them around the flight deck for, while we were landing and departing, just to see what the dog would do as part of that process, to see, is this dog overreacting to the noise and the rotor wash? Are they, and it was part of that training. Right from the get-go. So even these dogs that were with the elite teams in the military do the same thing. Exposure. It's just so important.
I think it takes about 3 months.
Yeah, it depends on the individual dog too and the type of aircraft. But more and more agencies are starting to realize the importance of doing it because, like I said, you just throw it in the aircraft and you get to where you're going. The dog is all stressed out. It's been shaking the whole time. It can't perform appropriately.
Right. Now you're asking them to do the mission and they're not doing it to their best abilities that they can because they're distracted from that anxiety. And now you want them to find a person or an explosive or narcotics or a hard drive, and they're like, well, yeah, I can do that, but I'm not myself right now. And that leads to bad things. So great.
Right.
Well, it leads to this problem we have now where she wants to go flying and we're not flying today.
Yeah.
And then Jack, you put all their equipment on, and he's like, okay, let's go to work. So as you can see, he's doing laps, waiting for us to land the helicopter.
That's so great.
We flew a SEAL team, dog team, to a fundraising event from the Navy down in Monterey about 10 years ago, 8 or 10 years ago. And we'd been working with her for a while. And they wanted a shot where they jumped out with us about, 2 or 3 feet up, right? And so we came a couple times to practice, and they couldn't get their dog to jump out on time any of those times. Whereas Torque, immediately you just say jump out, she'll jump out at almost any heights, probably too high.
Yeah.
She has confidence.
Yeah. Well, you brought up the fact that she's running around. You wouldn't know she's 10 years old. She's literally, for the folks that can't see, she's doing laps around them as they sit.
I was really surprised that when Kris told me when I met Torque, 10 years old, I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
She's just in great condition and alert, her eyes. I mean, everything, she's in great shape.
And she's your typical Malinois. You guys run law enforcement, so they primarily use Malinois nowadays. It's because they're a lot more agile than German Shepherds. They're lighter than German Shepherds. The drive is off the charts. A lot of agencies refer to them as German Shepherds on crack.
I've heard that.
Well, you mentioned picking her up as a pup, and I feel like her temperament's uniquely suited for what she's doing. You obviously didn't know what she was going to grow into as far as her temperament. How did that work out, and how did that kind of did you go into this thinking that she was going to be a therapy dog, or did you go into this not really knowing and you're kind of dependent upon her temperament?
Thank you to our sponsor, Precision Aviation Group. Mission-critical operators and fleet managers rely on Precision Aviation Group as a worldwide leading rotor and fixed-wing MRO provider. PAG provides tip-to-tail solutions in 4 MRO segments: avionics, components, engines, and manufacturing DER services. A single point of contact gives you access to over 150 million in inventory globally, 24/7. Just call 800-537-2778. Precision Aviation Group. Others sell parts. We sell support.
I wasn't sure what I was going to do with her when I first got her. So, I wanted to see what the type of temperament, because I have another Malinois that is your typical badass, bite everybody Malinois. Notice she is not here. And so I had her first, and she's not very people friendly. So I couldn't really do anything with her. She is also an electronic storage device detection dog. So she's incredible at that, but I can't go to public events with her. And one of the other reasons I'm flying with this Vietnam War era Huey helicopter is this helicopter tells a lot of the stories that weren't able to be told after the war was over because of the climate when the war was over. A lot of people couldn't tell their stories. And so it tells a lot of the stories that couldn't be told. And one of those stories is what happened to the U.S. war dogs after the Vietnam War. There was over 4,000 dogs that served in all the branches, and they're credited with saving over 10,000 lives. Well, when the war was over, they were considered equipment, so they were left behind. So Torque flying in here, when we go places, she starts the dialogue so we can start talking about what happened to the dogs then. I mean, now after Robbie's Law was passed, they do bring him home, but these are the forgotten heroes of the Vietnam War. So Torque helps tell that story when she flies in this helicopter.
To call it leaving them behind is a disservice. They killed them.
Right.
Yeah. It's terrible. I read about that the other night on the website, Kris, and 4,000. I was stunned at that. That was higher than I would have guessed. And then when I read about how many were left behind, and it was just troubling. And I'm so thankful that things have changed.
And a lot of people don't know that story. That's why we do it.
Oh, I was stunned. I mean, I was stunned by it. And I knew that they were involved, that there were a lot of dogs in Vietnam, but I had no idea it was that number. That's just one more added thing to where Torque's bringing awareness to history, as the Huey is, as we're going to get into here shortly. It's just history that's part of our country. So that's great. It's being brought out and things like that.
You brought up all the lives that were saved as a result of those dogs' service in Vietnam. And when I look at law enforcement and the protection and the lives that they save just in law enforcement alone, it's easy to extrapolate that and consider on a larger scale how many lives these dogs saved and the effect that they had in that time and currently as well. We talked to Jimmy Hatch, and he was a canine handler with the SEAL teams, and he talks about his passion and love for the dogs that came as a result of his time there. And they're so impactful, and just love what you're doing with Torque in so many different ways. Thank you for doing that, and really neat to see her again. Going back to HAI, there was, everywhere I looked when you were over there was people lining up to come see Torque, and it was just really neat. So thank you for bringing her, and look forward to seeing her at some of their events as we go forward.
It was really fun having her at the Hell Expo. I mean, it was like walking around like a little rock star. I didn't even get to see everything because she was mobbed. You saw it everywhere we went. She was mobbed.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it was really cool.
It's pretty cool. Maybe Linda will let us put her sculpture in the booth next year.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
Good.
Yeah.
All right, Linda will be listening. There you go, Linda. That's a good idea. I like it.
Actually, one of our more successful fundraising things, which costs nothing with the helicopter because we're not flying, is at air shows or wherever we go. We let kids get in and sit with the dog, with Torque, and then parents get to take pictures, and we charge them for that privilege. And that is one of our best money-making support activities, is Torque with the kids, with the parents, with the photographs.
Good stuff. That's a great idea.
Yep.
Yeah. Took us a while to figure that out. We're dumb. That they were more interested in the dog than the helicopter. If you put them together, they were really interested in that they would pay.
Well, you might be, this won't surprise you now, but when you go back to shows like Cops and LAPD Life from the Beat, those types of police shows that have been on for decades now, the top rated episodes in those shows are always canine and helicopter related. There you go. And you put them together and it's like, yeah, you got a winning team there.
Well, we talk about the importance of social media, and you look at the successful social media accounts that are launched from law enforcement. And just like you said, it's the most successful are the canine operators and the aviation pages. There's just a lot of interest in both of those. So too, if you could combine those, it would be like a super social media page, and it's just a great way to promote what law enforcement's doing. You talk about transparency, and for folks that are paying taxes, they want to see where their tax money is going. And I think social media is a really good way to, highlight the good things that are being done as a result of these aviation programs. So, we're still here in the introduction phase. And again, for folks that can't see, you guys are sitting in your hangar. Where's your hangar located?
Budfield Aviation at Hayward Executive Airport.
Okay.
In Hayward. So
behind you is the aircraft that you guys have literally refurbished from the ground up.
We have no idea. That one behind us, that's a very expensive cardboard reproduction.
Nice. It's a nice cardboard.
Yeah, I know. You like it. It looks real, doesn't it? Making it look 3D and everything.
The cardboard is very shiny.
That's the one that she's been talking about. That's 309. It's our little baby. We've had her for 21 years.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Geoff, can you introduce yourself and talk about your role within the program and what your background is?
I'm Geoff Carr. I'm the chief cook and bottle washer for EMU Inc, Huey Vets, that runs the helicopter. To my left is Croy Pelletier, who's our chief pilot. And to his left is my son, Brandon, who is our maintenance supervisor.
Awesome.
So you have the guts of this burgeoning organization right here in front of you. Yeah, there you go. Anyway, we got the helicopter in 2003. Brandon, my partner, a guy that was in my unit in Vietnam, the guy I spoke, I think, off camera about, we were in the helicopter business together commercially many years ago. Anyway, we got it in 2003 from the Sacramento Sheriff's Office. She was pretty rough. You can go to our website. She'd been at Fort Rucker for her last 10 years as a trainer. And the doors were painted orange. Jack, you probably know that, how the training, they paint them day glow orange. And one of the doors had, I think, 8 or 10 coats of hand painted orange on it. And after we stripped her all down, and we did the weight and balance before and stripped her all down and did it after, she was about 100 pounds lighter. That's how much paint we took off her. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. There was a lot of paint on it. Anyway, it was a face only a mother could love. Yeah. Anyway, but we were planning to take her apart and do all of the restoration anyway. So that really didn't matter. The cosmetic stuff, we bought her from Sacramento Sheriff's Office because she had real good component times, particularly engine.
You talked about her last 10 years being at Fort Rucker. Offline, we did talk about her service. She actually was deployed and spent time in Vietnam.
Yes, she was she's a 65, and she spent a year or so in 66, 67, another one 67, 68, last time, I think 70. And she was ill-starred. Wasn't in a frontline assault helicopter company like the one that she's replicated to be in. She was a support helicopter in battalion maintenance operations, but she still managed to lose her tail boom every time she went out in the field. She had 3 tail boom replacements, which was not atypical. This the tail rotor going in the water during the rainy season was a real common problem.
Yeah.
And if you don't know, you guys would know. Tail rotor goes in water. That's the end of that. Off comes the back of the tail boom, and the gearbox flies somewhere else. So there you go.
Well, it's awesome that you've put so much time and effort into restoring this beautiful aircraft. And you talk about some of the work you're doing through that one. It's literally a flying museum. You've kind of restored this in the way that they were flown originally in Vietnam. We talked about kind of the purest mindset that you guys have.
Thank you to our sponsor, CNC Technologies. CNC Technologies, serving law enforcement, government, and military markets with tailored mission solutions, system training, and live 24/7 support with CNC.live platform. Explore more at cnctechnologies.com.
If you want, I can add on that. Now, I think that was off camera, that a lot of people have, quote, restored them, and then they just put a coat of paint on them. But for example, we're running all of the original tube radios, and that's becoming difficult, but we still run all of that stuff. All the antennas are original, all sorts of things that got changed. I talked to you about wire cutters that everybody put on them. They have to come off because they didn't exist in Vietnam. And then she is, as I'm pointing back at her, she's replicated as the longest surviving one in our company, which was the 135th Assault Helicopter Company. A typical assault helicopter company, except we were half Australian Navy and half Army. The only unit put together like that after World War II. There were some put together like that with MacArthur down in New Guinea going to the Philippines, but it was the only one post-war, so she's historically significant. And then this aircraft that we replicated, 309, we went through our records. The Army keeps meticulous records about all aircraft and units dating back to Vietnam. And she was the longest surviving one in our company. She lasted 28 months. Average life expectancy of a Huey in an assault helicopter company was about 6 months. Only about a quarter of them went over a year, and a quarter of them didn't make 3 months. I can attest to that, 2 of mine. And when I say that, they didn't get totally destroyed. They would be shot down, destroyed, or whatever, but oftentimes they were hooked out, had to go back to Corpus Christi, Texas to be overhauled and then sent back. But in a little over 4 years of operation, our unit went through 150 of these, 147 to be precise, to keep 25 or 6 operational at any given time.
Wow.
It's amazing.
Yeah, we talked offline again about a book titled Low Level Hell. And while it's not about Hueys, he does highlight the battle damage that these took. And you talk about that with the life expectancy that these, faced. It's absolutely amazing to read and hear about, how much damage these aircraft could sustain and continue to fly. As we progress, I want to hear more about your experience in Vietnam and operationally what you did there and how that's kind of come full circle in what you're doing. You talked about the half Australian crew. I know your pilot had come back, and this was a therapeutic way of him reconnecting and helping him deal with some of his PTSD that he's dealt with. But real quick, before we kind of get into that, we'll go through the introductions and circle back. But I do want to talk about, you talked about the original equipment that you have on the aircraft, and you talked about some of the difficulties that surround replacing that equipment as time goes. I know you have a current need now as far as rotor blade replacement goes. Can you talk about what that need is? And maybe there's a listener that has a lead on some equipment that you could use.
That'd be great, John. Thank you. Yeah, what we're looking for right now is a set of main rotor blades. We don't need a lot of time left on them. We're just looking for something that's serviceable with some time on them that could be donated or discounted to us. There's a bunch of work we have to do. These rotor blades have been on for 20 years. We've had the head overhauled and done other things in that time, but we need to take them off and have them reconditioned and do some things with them. And we don't want to get them off and have one of them not be airworthy and then go, hey, shucks, look, we don't have rotor blades. So, we're looking for anybody, and a lot of operators, if they were doing fire contracts and things like that, they would change the blades and keep a set that had 150, 200 hours or something. If they were going to put her on contract for a whole summer and use up more time than that, they would have those blades laying around. And that's basically what we're looking for. We're not looking for a handout of new rotor blades. That would be lovely. But that's an expensive proposition. We're looking for hopefully somebody that might be able to see their way to donate some decent blades with time on them.
Going back to the idea that you guys are kind of purist when it comes to the equipment you're putting on there, is there any special specifications that need to be considered with the donations?
Yeah, these are not composite. This is all pre-composite stuff, and that's where most of the replacements have come in. Everybody's gone to composites because they're a whole bunch of ways better. And so it's the replacement of these blades, the normal aluminum blades, with the composite blades that there should be a bunch of them out there that are available is what our thought is. But yeah, this has no composite anything on it.
I'm just going to continue from your side. You got Croy sitting next to you. Could you introduce yourself, kind of let us know what your role is there and what you do from your 9 to 5?
Currently, I'm just a maintenance manager for aircraft. But prior to that, I used to fly for several companies in the Bay Area, Bell Products, about 6,000 hours of flight time. And I came to EMU to fly, which we don't do a whole lot of anymore, about 25 hours a year. But I'm also a mechanic, so I do a lot of maintenance with Brandon. And this aircraft requires a lot of maintenance.
Yeah. Yeah.
We actually were able to get the ADS-B to work with the tube radios, which took about a year to figure out how to do that. Yeah.
So, those are challenges that I can't even comprehend. How do you merge new technology with old technology? Can you talk about some of the challenges you've had with stuff like that?
I think that's Brandon's job, not mine. I'm a pilot.
Okay. we're better at breaking stuff than fixing stuff.
Yeah.
Well, let's then continue. Brandon, can you introduce yourself and what your role is?
I'm Brandon Carr. I'm lead mechanic, whatever you want to call me.
We don't really have positions.
Yeah, nobody's got a position. We used to call Peter, my dad's partner from Vietnam, the chief mechanic and chief pilot, but neither Croy and I ever really wanted to take over at least the name of that position when he left. So we just we fill our obligations as necessary.
Actually, as a side note, this is actually very interesting to me as a pilot and a mechanic. This operation was started and done by two mechanics, not by any pilots. In Vietnam, they were both mechanics.
He's talking about Peter. Peter and I flew together. We were both crew chiefs, not pilots at the time. He went on to fly his whole career and became a pilot. I did not. But yeah, and the best part about it is I was his platoon sergeant on our second tour. So, I got to tell him what to do. Boy, did I pay for that when we started fixing this thing.
I don't think you can leave the restoration of a helicopter up to a couple pilots. Like I said, we're good at breaking stuff.
There you go. You know very well now. Yeah. You can't trust them not to break them, for God's sake.
But for you, you're managing your flight time, trying to keep costs under control. Can you talk about some of the maintenance considerations that goes into place for you guys as you're maintaining and continuing to restore this aircraft?
Well, the biggest, other than continuous deterioration of parts, which every helicopter has, The biggest long-term problem for us is that we operate so far out of the maintenance requirements from the Army that we will never hit any of the overhaul hour amounts for the rotor head, transmission, whatever. That even though we've done them recently, the coming to a determination as to when those should be done, if we're not going to hit for instance, I think we discussed with the rotor head, we've got 2,200 hours, we'll just say 25. You can imagine that's not going to happen in anybody's lifetime at 25 hours a year. So coming up with methodology for how to care for the components of the aircraft, particularly the expensive critical components that are subjected to difficult things to know anything about at the time without opening them up, like corrosion, bearing wear, stuff like that. We've tried to, at least recently, we'd gone through, we'd hit times on some things earlier in mid-2010s. In the past couple of years, COVID giving us a break, decided to sit down and start coming up with a long-term plan for how to maintain the equipment and set ourselves up for not doing everything all at once, and kind of finding periods of time, intervals that are sufficient for us to open up take a look at the grips, take a look at the tail rotor hub, open up the transmission, get an idea of what's going on as the decades go on. We're 2 decades in now. So none of it's going to happen anytime soon. Obviously, we just did it, most of it 5 years ago. Well, 2024, almost 10 years ago now. But I think aside from the tube radio problem, which I will let Croy talk about because he's fascinated by that, and keeping the older avionics components operational, there's not a whole lot we can do about that. Once they stop functioning, we'll probably just end up having to replace them with something that's more current, unless we get lucky. But the larger safety of flight operational issues are definitely something we talk about on a regular basis, and we spend a lot of I want to say sleepless nights, but a lot of time trying to understand what the limitations of the equipment is, given the fact that we're operating at such a discrepancy from what the maintenance manual actually tells us, just in terms of flight hours per year.
Yeah, let me say that to make sure that's understood. What we're doing is way more than the Army. We're signed up because we're experimental, so we're signed up on the Army maintenance system. That's our flight permission through the FAA. But what we found is those times are so long, we're not satisfied with that. So we're developing a schedule where we take them apart over calendar time and look at them and do things that wouldn't be required by the Army. But then the Army was planning on, for example, in the unit I was in, as much as we flew, we would do 25-hour inspections 2 or 3 times a week. So with that, that's a whole different kettle of fish than 25 hours a year or how to project the time.
Yeah. Yeah, visually looking at a lot of those components, I'd imagine they look great, and they have very little time on them. But some of the considerations, like you said, with corrosion and environmental wear, it just makes things different because you're not flying a lot of time. It's more of the environment you're in, the amount of time that it's on the
when we rebuilt the transmission, we actually had to throw away the top case because it was corroded out from the inside. So you wouldn't even be able to see that from the outside. So because the materials that they use in there aren't pure aluminum or pure any metal. They're kind of a combination, so they tend to want to corrode naturally by themselves.
Yeah, mag aluminum.
They're mag aluminum, right? But not that's okay.
Thanks. I'm just a pilot.
No, he's right. Some of them are.
Some of them are.
Some are. A lot of the cases are mag.
So corrosion's a big issue for us, and internal corrosion and also bearings. They might not have grease all the way around when.
The tail rotor bearings are particularly susceptible to sitting a long time, and then if you're not using them, and then things grease moves down, and you get flat spots and blah blah blah. We're learning all about these longer term things that when you're flying them the way you're in the Army, you don't have to worry about.
We do start the helicopter at least every 2 to 3 weeks, just to move things around.
When you talk about part supply, I can imagine that being super difficult. Can you talk about some of the challenges and maybe some of the surprises you've had with supply and availability of parts?
Well, there is a pretty significant availability of, at least with the dynamic components, masts, transmissions, rotor heads, gearboxes. because they made so many of them, and then to service those, there's a lot, and you can still buy some things new from Bell. They are extremely expensive, as you can imagine. The more difficult things for us, like I said, were the radios and the inverters. And I'm trying to think of some of the stuff. We have an ADF, we don't use it, so I'm not terribly concerned about the longevity of that. But those things are serviceable only. There is nothing we can do to replace them when they fail. We actually have 5 VHFs that we cannibalize for parts to keep one operational, 1 or 2, so that we can swap out if one's having an issue and get the other one worked on.
Which is becoming a problem also. The people who used to service things are starting to become rarer and rarer. And when he says inverters, it's not like a solid state inverter. It's actually a DC motor churning a alternator that makes the AC current for the aircraft. And I'm not really sure why the Army decided to use AC gauges and stuff like that in the aircraft, but I think they wanted to make the Huey more like an airplane.
The inverters are called coffee grinders because that's what they sound like.
Yeah, that's interesting. Going back to corrosion, you talked about some of the difficulties with that. Have you found any effective methods to prevent some of the corrosion that you're experiencing?
Just starting it all the time.
Yeah. Well, because most of the stuff we're concerned about, we're not worried about external. We're cleaning it, working on it on a regular basis. We don't really fly in rain. There's a lot of things that we just generally how we operate. We don't have an issue externally with the aircraft, but there's not a lot you can do to account for issues inside the gearboxes, inside the rotor head bearings that are, as I just pointed out, bearings that are not being used on a regular basis, much like any piston engine or anything else. Everything can fall away, and because of the environment we're in, we're only 25 miles from the Pacific.
We're considered moderate saltwater environment.
Yeah, there's only so much you can do. So regular operation and kind of projections, which is what I was discussing earlier, for when to open things up to make sure that we don't have larger issues developing that you can't see.
Needless to say, we do oil samples every 25 hours and do a lot of things to look for that as best we can. Brandon overhauled when he's talking about these things. He was lucky he got his A&P since he started working with us, and then whatever. But then he worked at PacWest Helicopters, John Gannon's operation up in Reading, which is one of the best on the West Coast. He worked there for 2 years, overhauling transmissions, gearboxes, rotor heads, and that's been invaluable for us, for them to bring that back with them, so that we know a lot more ourselves about the interior of these things.
Yeah, that's invaluable, like you said. And just real quick, I want to touch on the succession plan that you had mentioned with your son. Genius to bring him in, not only because of his experience, but you brought up, at some point he'll kind of lead the project. Can you talk about that succession plan and how you envision the program going? Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Hangar Z podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories that promote the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation. Lastly, stand by for a message after a word from our sponsors. Cheers.
Thank you to our sponsor, Precision Aviation Group. Mission-critical operators and fleet managers rely on Precision Aviation Group as a worldwide leading rotor and fixed-wing MRO provider. PAG provides tip-to-tail solutions in 4 MRO segments: avionics, components, engines, and manufacturing DER services. A single point of contact gives you access to over 150 million in inventory globally, 24/7. Just call 800-537-2778. Precision Aviation Group. Others sell parts. We sell support.
Bell is proud to sponsor Vertical Helicasts and their vision to hold meaningful mission, safety, and best practice conversations in the helicopter industry. The lessons learned from these conversations will undoubtedly shape the future of both new and veteran helicopter operators.
Thank you to our sponsor, CNC Technologies. CNC Technologies, serving law enforcement, government, and military markets with tailored mission solutions, system training, and live 24/7 support with CNC.live platform. Explore more at cnctechnologies.com.
Thank you to our sponsors for supporting the Hanger Z podcast, as well as the Vertical Helicast platform. Without your support, we wouldn't be able to have these conversations. I thank you for listening to this important conversation that honors the great work being done by Canine Torque and the Huey Vets. Much of this discussion is centered around the topic of mental health and PTSD. This is an area of conversation that we feel is vitally important. Each time we have the discussion, our hope is that we normalize the importance and necessity of mental health and mental health treatment. To further the discussion on mental health and mental health treatment, we have an upcoming 2-part series with Dr. Tanya Glenn, whose practice is solely dedicated to providing the best possible care and restoring the resilience of first responders, veterans, and their families. To find out more about Dr. Tanya Glenn, go to www.tanyaglenn.com. That's Tania Glenn, Glenn.com. This is a series you don't want to miss. Cheers.
Time to close up the hangar. Thanks for joining us on the Hanger Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts.